I think most people are going to know what we're talking about here. It's Left Behind, the books and the movies. It's Thief in the Night, the famous one from the 1970s. But it goes earlier than that. So take us back. Where was the beginning of Rapture fiction?
What I learned in my own research was just how significant the fiction part of this was to shaping American evangelicalism. These are all books that kind of take imaginative approaches, especially to Daniel and Revelation, and imagine Christians or people who eventually become Christians or people who are not Christians living through mostly the tribulation. The early American examples really overlap with dispensationalism's popularity in America in general, which happened prior to the 20th century, but really sped up in the early 20th century, especially as lots of big events made people less likely to be post-millennialist, less likely to think that the world would get better and better until Jesus came back. Things like the Civil War, but eventually World War I and World War II in particular. You can maybe get through one World War and think things are getting better and better, but Second World War, you're not going to think that's a good thing.
Right.
So the fiction part really starts happening in this era, which is interesting because at this period, there still was a lot of energy among conservative Christians to say that all forms of popular culture were evil and should be avoided, including just the category of novels. So there was an adjustment period where we had to convince, but people thought, okay, well, if it's about the Bible, then it must be okay. And this still continues to this day.
Yeah.
Yes, there is a lot of, people throughout the 20th century, especially the late 20th century, talked about, popular apocalyptic or popular thriller kind of stories or movies and said we have to make Christian versions of these.
Rapture fiction is something of a misnomer in that, like, you and I would see it as fiction and they may have been sold as fiction, but the way their audience engaged these products, books and movies, was not really as fiction. They kind of saw it as a pre-documentary, almost predicting of what is going to unfold in history. So how did people engage this stuff? Like, what? Yeah. How was it marketed? Did they really push that this is an accurate layout of what's going to happen, or did people view it primarily as entertainment, true fiction?
It really depends. There's one book in particular that has been helpful for me in understanding this. Amy Frykholm wrote this book called Rapture Culture, and it's an ethnographic study of people who read the Left Behind novels. So she's not really making theological judgments. She's just looking at, like, who are these people? How do they read these books? How do they think about them? And she says there's a good amount of the market of this that are either not Christians, they just think these are thrillers. There are a lot of people that read them that are Christians but are not dispensationalists, or even when asked questions about dispensational theology, don't really identify with that at all. There are a lot of people who come from traditions that are not dispensationalist at all. Their pastor would be horrified that they believe this is true, but they've read a lot of the novels, and so they've started to believe it's true. And I think one of the most interesting things that she found about the this again, specifically about the Left Behind books, but I think it can apply a little more broadly too, is that she found that people who read the Left Behind books, especially people who were also Christians and or people who just read the Bible regularly, read those two things very differently. They read the Bible in short daily spurts, like good evangelical Christians with their daily quiet time. They would read a chapter or two at a time, close the Bible, go, and they would ask at the end of the Bible reading, like, what does this mean for me today?
How do I apply this to my life?
How do I apply this to my life? Yeah. They would read the Left Behind books for hours at a time, but very similar in that they were taught to read the Bible as, what do I do with this? How does this change my life? And they read the Left Behind books that way. So they read the Left Behind books and thought, I need to evangelize to my neighbors so that they don't go through the tribulation. I need to be the kind of hero that fights against whatever the economic evil power is in this book. I need to see myself in the character of these people in this novel, coming away with a sense of what I am supposed to do in the world, which is really, I think, one of the most frightening parts about this is that people really want to be the average Joe guy that always is in all these movies, that just happens to be at the right place at the right time, or maybe even is chosen by God to fight the evil power, to sacrifice what needs to be sacrificed. Right. It's not someone who their response to the Antichrist is to, like, stay married and plant a garden and just be a good, faithful person in their community. No, their response is to, like, fly to Israel and fight the guy and do the, I mean, it's so dramatic. It's so action movie. And I think that has had a real effect on how people think they are supposed to respond not only to these kind of stories they've read, but to scripture. That the answer is, what do I do? And I am expecting the answer of what do I do to apply this to my life is some dramatic action movie kind of thing.
I think the action movie component is really, really important here. I can understand why a 20-year-old guy back in 1995 reads Left Behind or watches the movie and maybe had no interest in church stuff, but goes, oh, this is really cool, and this taps into that insecurity I have about needing to prove my mettle or whatever. But it's a big piece of all this.
Another one of the really interesting effects of this, I think, because I'm thinking, so in the Left Behind books, there's Ray, who's the pilot, Nicolas Cage in the Nicolas Cage adaptation. And then there's Buck Williams, who's the reporter, who's Kirk Cameron in the Kirk Cameron version. Buck he loses his big reporter job in the first book, but the Antichrist figure in those books has control over the media. And by the media, they mean traditional TV, radio, magazines and newspapers. So what Buck has to do is spread the truth about what's happening, the truth about the Antichrist on the internet, because the internet is the one place that the Antichrist does not have control over. Oh. So if you start thinking about, conspiracy theories today, about Christian susceptibility to those things, I think it's not too much of a stretch to say that it's at least impacted by this kind of storytelling. And I think this is why it's so, you can't really separate out the political effects of this or the social effects of this from the theological effects of this. It is all really intertwined. Don't think that just because a book has ostensibly Christian themes, it's truthful or even a truthful representation of the theology it pretends to be a representation of.